It was a quiet spring afternoon in Tracy, California, March 27, 2009. 8-year-old Sandra Cantu had just come home from school, dropped off her backpack, and, like most days, ran outside to play with her friends. She lived with her mother, grandparents, and older sister in a small mobile home park. The kind of neighborhood where doors stayed unlocked, where kids rode bikes freely, and where everyone knew each other by name. For Sandra, this Friday felt like any other. Warm sunlight, laughter echoing between homes, and excitement of weekend plans ahead. She played hopscotch, kicked a ball, and visited a few friends. At around 4 p.m., she waved goodbye to one of them and then vanished. When Sandra didn't return home for dinner, her mother, Maria Chavez, wasn't immediately alarmed. It wasn't unusual for her daughter to lose track of time when playing outside. But as the evening sky darkened and the laughter from the playground faded, worry began to take its place. By 7:30 p.m., Maria realized something was wrong. She called Sandra's friends, knocked on neighbors' doors, and walked the small mobile home park, shouting her daughter's name. No one had seen her since late afternoon. Then came the moment every parent dreads, the call to police. At 8 p.m., officers from the Tracy Police Department arrived. They quickly realized this wasn't a case of a child wandering off. Sandra's family and friends describe her as bright, polite, and cautious, the kind of little girl who wouldn't talk to strangers or leave without telling her mom. Within hours, the case transformed into a full-scale missing child investigation. By morning, the quiet streets of Orchard Estates were lined with police cars, search dogs, and volunteers wearing bright vests. Hundreds of people joined the search. Teachers, neighbors, church members. Flyers with Sandra's smiling face were taped to windows, light poles, and gas station doors across town. The image became impossible to ignore. A little girl with long brown hair, wearing a pink Hello Kitty shirt, smiling wide, innocent and full of life. Reporters arrived. Helicopters hovered overhead. The story of Sandra Cantu's disappearance spread far beyond Tracy, reaching national headlines within a day. Everyone asked the same question. How can 8-year-old vanish in broad daylight, in the middle of a tight-knit community? Investigators turned to the most objective witness they had: surveillance cameras mounted around the neighborhood. One video, recorded at 3:54 p.m., showed Sandra skipping down the street near her home, her ponytail bouncing as she disappeared around a corner. It was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. That single piece of footage became the anchor for the investigation, a haunting symbol of innocence moments before tragedy. As police interviewed residents, one name came up repeatedly: Melissa Huckaby. She was a 28-year-old Sunday school teacher at a local church, calm, polite, and seemingly trustworthy. She also lived in the same mobile home park as Sandra. Her 5-year-old daughter was one of Sandra's playmates. Neighbors described Melissa as quiet but kind, a young single mother who kept to herself but always smiled when greeting others. When questioned, Melissa said she hadn't seen Sandra that day, a simple denial that at first didn't raise suspicion. But what no one could have imagined then was that this woman, the one teaching children Bible stories about love and forgiveness, was hiding a darkness beyond comprehension. Over the next week, police scoured every inch of Tracy: fields, irrigation ditches, barns, and dumpsters. FBI agents joined the search, combing through evidence and interviewing over 200 residents. Nothing, no sign of Sandra. But the hope remained, faint, desperate, but alive. Her family prayed constantly, while strangers left candles and teddy bears at a growing memorial near the park entrance. 10 days passed. And then on April 6, 2009, everything changed. A farm worker noticed something unusual while draining a nearby irrigation pond. A black suitcase floated to the surface, heavy, waterlogged, and sealed. When he pulled it ashore and opened it, what he found would change the town of Tracy forever. Inside was the body of Sandra Cantu, the little girl who had vanished 10 days earlier, found just 2 miles from home, inside a suitcase that no one recognized. The news broke instantly. Crowds gathered, reporters wept, and an entire community that had held on to hope collapsed under the weight of grief. Detectives now had a new mission: to find the person who could do something this monstrous. And soon, the clues would lead them right back to someone they all trusted, the Sunday school teacher who once taught Sandra about heaven. When the discovery of Sandra Cantu's body made the evening news, Tracy, California, fell silent. The small town that once felt safe and familiar suddenly felt foreign, its streets haunted by the realization that a killer had been among them all along. At the Tracy Police Department, detectives gathered in a dimly lit conference room. On one side of the table lay crime scene photos, maps of the area, and a timeline of Sandra's last known movements. The suitcase, now sealed in evidence, became the case's most critical clue. It wasn't just any suitcase. It was distinctive black medium size with worn edges and faded stitching. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood again, asking residents if they recognized it. Hours later, someone did. A neighbor mentioned seeing Melissa Huckaby, the Sunday school teacher, carrying a similar suitcase to her car just days before Sandra disappeared. That single observation would soon unravel everything. Detectives remembered Melissa's earlier statement. She had said she hadn't seen Sandra that day and knew nothing about her disappearance. But when they visited Melissa again, she seemed nervous. Her story shifted slightly. She now said that her suitcase had been stolen from her driveway the day Sandra went missing. To investigators, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a confession hiding behind convenience. They asked for more details. Melissa claimed she left her suitcase outside her car briefly while packing, and that someone must have taken it. But she couldn't describe what was inside, nor could she explain why she hadn't reported the theft. Detectives quietly marked her as a person of interest. The next logical step was to search the one place Melissa spent most of her time, the Clover Road Baptist Church, where she taught Sunday school. Police obtained a warrant and began combing through the church's classrooms, storage rooms, and hallways. The atmosphere was tense. This was a place of faith and innocence, now under the shadow of an unthinkable crime. Then, in a small utility closet, officers found a purple child's rolling suitcase tag, one that matched the same brand and style as the suitcase recovered from a pond. Beside it, faint stains on the carpet tested positive for blood. The evidence was mounting, and it pointed straight to Melissa Huckaby. As the investigation deepened, police observed Melissa's increasingly erratic behavior. She began inserting herself into the case, attending vigils crying publicly, and even handing out missing posters with Sandra's face on them. Reporters captured footage of her sobbing during interviews, saying she hoped Sandra would be found safe. But behind the tears, investigators noticed something else, a performance. When questioned privately, she alternated between calm detachment and emotional outbursts. Detectives with experience in behavioral analysis saw a pattern. Melissa's emotions seemed staged, her grief strategic. And then came another twist, one that turned suspicion into certainty. Late one night, police received a tip. A note had been found at the local church, the same one where Melissa worked. It was written on lined notebook paper and folded carefully. The message read, "Cantus suitcase in the water on Bucketty Road and Whitehall Road. Witness." The handwriting was shaky, rushed, but police forensic analysts quickly identified it as a match to Melissa Huckaby's handwriting. In that moment, detectives knew she was trying to redirect suspicion, pretending to be a witness instead of the perpetrator. It was a classic tactic, misdirection born of panic. On April 10th, 2009, police executed a search warrant at Melissa Huckaby's home. Inside, they seized her computer, journals, and multiple items of evidence linking her to the crime. During questioning, Melissa broke down repeatedly, shifting from tears of denial to eerie calmness. When detectives confronted her with the evidence, the suitcase, the blood, and the note, she whispered only one thing: "I didn't mean for it to happen." Moments later, she asked for an attorney. Melissa Huckaby was arrested and charged with the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu. The community's shock deepened into horror. How could someone who taught children about kindness commit something so grotesque? And perhaps more chillingly, why? As investigators dug deeper into Melissa's life, a disturbing portrait began to emerge. She wasn't the wholesome Sunday school teacher everyone thought she was. She had a history of emotional instability, depression, and attention-seeking behavior. Friends describe her as manipulative, someone who needed control, who thrived on pity. She had been hospitalized for mental health issues and had a pattern of erratic relationships. What no one realized was that beneath her soft-spoken exterior was a profound darkness, one capable of unimaginable cruelty. And in the end, it was Sandra's innocence that drew her into that darkness, an act of violence with no rational motive, only the twisted satisfaction of power. During later interrogations, Melissa offered a fragmented confession. She claimed that Sandra had come to her home to play, and that things went wrong. She refused to say more, but physical evidence filled in the blanks. Fibers, fingerprints, and forensic DNA from a suitcase confirmed what Melissa wouldn't say aloud. Sandra Cantu had been sexually assaulted and murdered, and placed in a suitcase by Melissa Huckaby, the woman she trusted. By the time the full truth came out, the story had grown beyond comprehension. The town of Tracy, once united by faith and friendship, now wrestled with a question no one could answer. How could evil hide so easily behind the mask of the familiar? The town of Tracy, California, had endured weeks of disbelief. Now it waited for answers. When Melissa Huckaby, a Sunday school teacher and single mother, was led into court in handcuffs, the image felt impossible to process. The woman who once handed out cookies to neighborhood children now faced charges of kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder. The courtroom was overflowing. Reporters filled the benches, sketch artists hunched over pads, and residents from Orchard Estates sat shoulder to shoulder in stunned silence. In the front row sat Maria Chavez, Sandra's mother, holding a framed school photo of her daughter. She did not take her eyes off Huckaby once. Melissa entered wearing a pale jail uniform. Her hair was neatly combed, her expression flat. She avoided looking at anyone. The district attorney called it a case that defies explanation. He promised the jury a story of manipulation, lies, and betrayal of trust so profound it shattered an entire community. Prosecutors began by showing the jury the timeline, surveillance footage of Sandra skipping down the street, evidence of the black suitcase, and DNA linking Melissa to both Sandra and the container that held her. Then came the autopsy report. Forensic specialists testified that Sandra had suffered trauma before death, that she had been drugged, sexually assaulted, and asphyxiated. Each word landed like a hammer. Maria Chavez left the courtroom in tears more than once. Even seasoned journalists lowered their cameras. Huckaby's defense attorneys argued that she was mentally unstable and had acted in a state of psychosis. They presented records of hospitalizations, prescriptions, and episodes of self-harm, but prosecutors countered with calm precision. Mental illness may explain impulse, not premeditation, and the steps Melissa took after the killing showed clear awareness of guilt. She had hidden the body, written a false note, and lied repeatedly. This, the prosecutor said, was not madness, it was manipulation. Court-appointed psychologists later described Melissa as narcissistic, attention-seeking, and emotionally chaotic. One expert testified, she craved significance. When she felt powerless, she tried to regain control through extreme acts. It wasn't lust. It wasn't money. It was about power and attention, a pathological need to insert herself into tragedy and then pretend to grieve beside everyone else. After weeks of motions and testimony, something unexpected happened. Before the case could reach a full jury trial, Melissa Huckaby changed her plea. On May 10, 2010, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. She showed no emotion as the deal was read aloud. The judge asked if she understood the consequences. Melissa nodded once and whispered, "Yes." In that instant, the weight of the entire case collapsed into silence. There would be no lengthy trial, no dramatic verdict, only a quiet acknowledgement of guilt from the person least capable of remorse. When the judge pronounced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the courtroom erupted in quiet sobs. Maria Chavez stood slowly, clutching her daughter's photo. She said later, "There's no justice that brings Sandra back, but now I can finally let her rest." The judge addressed Huckaby directly. "You took the life of an innocent child, a child who trusted you. This court can offer only permanence, not peace." Melissa was led away without a word, her footsteps echoing across the courtroom floor. In prison, Melissa Huckaby became a ghost of the woman she once portrayed. Reports describe her as isolated, spending most of her time in protective custody, separated from the general population. Other inmates refused to speak to her. Guards kept close watch. She spends her days quietly reading, rarely speaking, and occasionally writing letters that go unanswered. Back in Tracy, the church closed for several months. Its congregation struggled to reconcile faith with horror. Parents stopped letting their children roam freely. The playground that once echoed with laughter felt heavier, quieter. Each year, the community held a memorial walk in Sandra's name. Lanterns are released into the evening sky. Her classmates, now adults, still speak of her smile, her curiosity, her love of drawing. Sandra became more than a victim. She became a symbol of awareness and vigilance, a reminder that evil can sometimes wear a gentle face. The tragedy of Sandra Cantu reveals something profoundly unsettling about human nature, that a person can live among us, teach our children, share our prayers, and still hide darkness beyond understanding. Sandra's story is no longer just a crime. It is a warning about trust, complacency, and the thin line between safety and danger that we often assume could never be crossed in our own neighborhood. When tragedy strikes a small town, it doesn't simply end with a verdict. It lingers in the empty classrooms, the quiet streets, the faces of parents who now hold their children closer than before. For Tracy, California, the murder of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu changed everything. In the years that followed, the Orchard Estates mobile home park never felt the same. Residents moved away. The small church where Melissa Huckaby once taught Sunday school was eventually closed and later demolished. But the memories remained, not just of Sandra, but of the innocence that vanished with her. Sandra's room at home stayed untouched for a long time. Her mother, Maria Chavez, often said it was the only space that still felt alive. Her drawings, her toys, the unfinished diary on her bed, they all became silent witnesses to a life stolen too soon. The case didn't just shock a community. It sparked conversations nationwide about child safety, trust, and the darker side of human behavior. Parents began teaching their children something they had never thought they'd need to, that not everyone who smiles at you means well, even if they seem kind. Schools and churches across the country reviewed safety protocols, background checks, and the ways children are supervised. Neighborhoods began forming tighter networks, ensuring that every child's whereabouts were known at all times. The story of Sandra's disappearance and murder made national headlines. Television shows, true crime documentaries, and podcasts tried to make sense of the unthinkable. Yet for many, there was an unspoken discomfort in discussing it. Because this crime shattered the very assumption that faith, community, and familiarity could protect us. Melissa Huckaby wasn't a stranger lurking in the dark. She was someone trusted, known, loved even. That fact made the crime almost incomprehensible. For the members of the Clover Road Baptist Church, faith became harder to hold. The sanctuary where Melissa had once taught Bible verses now felt haunted by betrayal. Sermons shifted from joy and trust to grief and forgiveness. Some congregants left religion entirely. Others clung to it, desperate to find meaning in the senseless. One pastor who later led the church described it as a wound that will never close, but a lesson that must never fade. For Sandra's mother, every day became an act of survival. In interviews, Maria often said that she still hears her daughter's laughter when she closes her eyes. She founded a foundation in Sandra's name, dedicated to supporting victims of child violence and raising awareness about child predators who hide behind trusted faces. Maria said in one speech, "If one child is protected because people remember Sandra, then her life still shines." Her strength became a symbol for countless grieving parents who watched her speak, not as a victim, but as a voice for the voiceless. Psychologists continued to study Huckaby's case for years. She defied easy explanation, not driven by drugs, not driven by money, but by an unstable mind that mixed jealousy, loneliness, and emotional manipulation. Experts later said she suffered from borderline personality traits delusions and a desire for control that escalated into lethal behavior. But even so, there remained one truth. She made a choice, and that choice destroyed everything around her. In prison, She remains mostly silent. When asked by reporters if she feels remorse, she only said, "I pray for her." But to many, her words rang hollow. Justice was served in a legal sense, but for the community, there was no true closure, because closure implies understanding, and there was nothing about this case that could ever make sense. Parents in Tracy still remember the day Sandra's smiling photo appeared on every news channel. The search, the discovery, the heartbreak, it became part of the town's DNA. Even new residents, years later, know of the little girl who vanished. The case became a dark point of reference, one that changed how people saw safety, trust, and even faith. Today, more than a decade later, Sandra's legacy endures. Her story is taught in criminology and psychology courses as a case study on betrayal and female offenders, a rare but deeply disturbing phenomenon. Her memorial in Tracy stands quietly under a tree near her old home, surrounded by toys and letters that strangers still leave. Children write messages like, "We love you, Sandra. You are safe now." And in that gesture, the world finds a small piece of healing. Sandra's story forces us to look at the uncomfortable truth that evil doesn't always look like evil. It can smile, it can teach, it can bake cookies and sing hymns. But behind the surface, something broken can still exist, hidden until it's too late. The tragedy of Sandra Cantu reminds us not only of what was lost, but of what must never be forgotten. That trust is sacred, and that vigilance, even in the safest places, can save lives. When we hear about stories like Sandra Cantu's, we want to believe they happened far away, in another place, another time, to people we'll never meet. But the truth is, tragedy doesn't ask for permission. It finds cracks in the safest walls and slips quietly inside. Sandra Cantu was only 8 years old, a girl who loved Hannah Montana, pink notebooks, and drawing hearts in the margins of her homework. She had a family who adored her, friends who waited for her every morning, and a town that now carries her name like a prayer. And yet, in the hands of someone she trusted, her world was taken, not by a stranger, but by a neighbor who once called her sweetheart. The story of Sandra Cantu isn't just about loss. It's about what happens after, when grief demands meaning, when a community learns to speak the child's name, not as a wound, but as a warning. Every parent who saw her face on the news began locking their doors tighter. Every teacher started watching more closely during recess. Every stranger's smile became a question. That's the shadow this story left behind, a constant reminder that even light needs protection. But with time came something else, a voice. Sandra's mother, Maria Chavez, didn't let silence win. She built a foundation to protect other children, spoke in schools, worked with law enforcement, and helped create safety programs so that fewer families would have to stand where she once stood. Through her pain, she turned tragedy into a kind of armor, not to forget Sandra, but to make sure the world never does. Today, if you drive through Tracy, California, there's a small park where children play under a sign that reads, Sandra's Garden. It's quiet there, peaceful. And sometimes, if you visit at sunset, you'll see pink balloons drifting in the sky, the same color Sandra loved. It's a place not of death, but of remembrance, a promise that innocence, though fragile, will always find a way to bloom again. Sandra's story teaches us that monsters don't always live in the dark. Sometimes they live next door. But for every act of cruelty, there are thousands of acts of kindness. People who stand up, speak out, and protect what's left of the light. And maybe that's what justice truly is. Not just punishment for the guilty, but protection for the innocent who still have a chance. This was the story of Sandra Cantu, the little girl who changed a town forever. If you believe her story deserves to be remembered, share her name, because silence protects the guilty. But truth keeps the innocent alive.